Thanks, Chris. We've got three great introductions there on exposing austerity Britain. Now I'd like to take questions from the floor. If you just ask a simple question, then we'll probably have time for 2 rounds. So I'll start there.
Problems of communication solved. I want to draw attention to the issue that's sometimes referred to as the decline of work, which is a major cause of social division and austerity in our country because people don't have any money. The role of the wages system for passing around wealth, redistributing wealth, is under challenge at the moment. And in an article published yesterday by John Harris, the political commentator in The Guardian, he drew attention to the aged nature of Britain's political class across all parties, which said that they don't have the mindset to deal with the problems that are coming, that they have backward-looking views and outmoded policies for yesterday's problems, while at the same time the British people are walking forward into a world of artificial intelligence, automation and technological change. As an example of which he quoted the Rolls-Royce factory, I think somewhere in Derby. Yeah. Okay, the question is basically this. What is the Corbynistic policy in respect of the decline of work, in respect of the displacement of jobs by artificial intelligence, and what is being done about it in terms of developing policies to deal with it in the future?
Okay. Anyone else? And then,
I just want to make 2 points. The economist who spoke first, I didn't catch her name, but one thing you didn't mention in your talk was the possible, it's just someone showed me a name, Professor Osman Araran. One thing you didn't mention in your talk was the possibility of a maximum wage, kind of capping the earning power at the very top, and the possibility as well of a redistribution of wealth by raising the tax rate and cracking down on tax dodgers and raising the tax rate for the richest 1% in this country. And I was wondering whether or not you didn't mention that as a possibility because it might be considered too much of a socialist idea or too not acceptable for the Labour Party policy. But that is something that I personally feel would deal with inequality quite successfully. There was another point, but I think that other people have a chance.
In similar vein, I'm not sure how far the Labour Party is prepared to dig into the point about where money actually comes from. 70% of MPs apparently in a poll conducted by Positive Money don't know how money is created, and if they're prepared to do anything about it. North Dakota.
well, I think you've asked your question.
North Dakota.
Okay. There's a woman.
A very simple question. It's just that in my experience, people aren't joining unions because they haven't got the money to pay for the fees.
That's it. Below.
Okay. In terms of the policies, I am totally an advocate of having a maximum income policy, as well as radically progressive taxation. I did actually mention both, but the chair was already telling me that I have -1 minute left, so I talk very quick, I'm sorry, but I did say that as part of how we finance the type of things we want to do, and that is about progressive taxation. Progressive taxation, for me, Calvin said it in the morning, the top marginal income tax rate on high incomes can go as high as 90% for me. It was 83%. If you inflate the tax bracket on which 83% tax rate applied back in the late 70s with the rate of increase in inflation to today's prices, it was income of around £90,000 a year. That's a lot of money actually. Only 1% of the wage and salaried people earn more than £90,000 a year. And you don't really need more than £90,000 a year, even in London, even with these outrageous housing prices. It's a different thing. So yes, that's one way. High top marginal income tax rates is one way of imposing maximum income. I did also say in my -2 minutes, we need to regulate high pay, executive pay, and one way of doing it is to think of pay ratios. What inequality are you ready to tolerate at the workplace in terms of the top income as a ratio to the lowest paid? And we can use public procurement for that. We can say we're not gonna give these companies any public procurement opportunity if they do not oblige with a ratio of, say, 1 to 6. So both taxation maximum income, I totally agree with you. And luckily, I don't see the Labour Party's current leadership shying away from these. So we have a movement to go out and tell this to people and convince them. And it's not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt 1%. And 99% will only benefit. I know I have now -3 minutes left, but what policies do we have to tackle technological change? Work will never end. Technological change has always happened in our last 200 centuries, 200 years, 2 centuries of industrial revolution. As I said, we have nothing to fear if we are united and have our collective voice. The most important remedy of working class movement against technological change and its negative impact, potentially negative impact on unemployment, was shortening working hours. Our movement has slowed down in that sense, but today we could well think of a work week of 20 hours. Sharing work, but with pay rise, for particularly people who are earning median income or below. It's not going to happen. You're not going to convince the people working short if they're struggling to make ends meet. The other way to deal with it is public investment. Public investment will create jobs, good, decent paid public jobs. And there, feminist economists are advocating in particular purple jobs in public social care, public child care, education and health. These are very labor-intensive sectors. You need a lot of these jobs. You can create a lot of jobs with £1 of investment in these sectors.
All right, thank you. Carol.
I'm going to start from the top. That's actually the bottom. Unions, joining unions. There are, thank God, youth rates often for joining unions, and they're not particularly well advertised. I know, for example, the NUT will let you join for £1 for your first couple of years in an NQT, which is really important because NQTs tend to be those who are not given their required training or hours, or just the expectations are either too high of them, and that kind of thing is really important. Youth rates, getting people on board that way. That said, you also need to show young people the benefits of trade unions, and if they're shown to be winning for people in the workplace, you do tend to have a higher union density. So that kind of thing is what we need to be seeing more of. We need to be seeing the unions fighting for the workplaces that they are in. In terms of MPs not knowing enough about the economy, well, I have a lot of time for MPs that come from all kinds of backgrounds, and sometimes, you know, our elected representatives are good at some things, but do not have an economic background. I don't think that's a bad thing. If we're going to have representatives from all over society, then let the experts do the advising, let the MPs do the representing. I think that's fair enough. You know, I'd love to see more teachers in Parliament talking about education, but they are not going to be experts on economic policy as well. That's just the nature of elected representatives.
They don't teach it in economy courses.
Well, quite. In terms of having a maximum wage, I believe that the Tory government is being highly ideological, very shamelessly. I think that the Labour Party needs to actually be ideological as well about what we think socialism should look like, and I think a maximum wage and higher taxes on higher earning is not something that we should shy away from. It would be better for society. And in terms of like the decline of work, and talking about yesterday's problems, I think we see that a lot in education. Education and educationalists often talk about how we can change education for the workers of tomorrow. Unfortunately, policy just doesn't catch up with it. We're currently teaching GOVE's curriculum, and what we need to be doing is actually like equipping young learners to work in an economy that we don't even know exists yet. And unfortunately, because of the way that policy works in this particular area, we're not going to see that. So I think we need to have a bit more forward thinking in all kinds of sectors, but education is the one I know best. And it's not happening because people are either uninformed about what they need, or they are ideologically after some other thing. So there you go.
Yeah, briefly, just in relation to the point about job displacement brought about by new technology. Well, one of the things I think we need to embrace is new technology, and if it means that we can work a shorter working week, well, that should be good, shouldn't it? What we need to do, I think, is make sure that we put into practice the maxim that was outlined in Thomas Piketty's tome, which some of you may have read, Capitalism in the 21st Century. There's a great line in there where he talks about capitalism should be the slave of democracy, not the other way around. Well, let's make capitalism the slave of democracy by embracing new technology, and if it means working a shorter working week, and as I talked about earlier on this morning, in the 1960s we were told to get ready for the leisure generation in the 1990s would only be working 15 hours or 20 hours a week, so we'd have to build all these leisure centres and we'd be taking up golf and swimming and God knows what else. It didn't quite work out like that, but it could work out like that. And if you go back even further than that, this is what the Luddites were complaining about. I mean, I never used Luddism as a pejorative term, because all they were saying was new technology should serve us, not actually put us into penury and absolute poverty, which is what happened. And that's what they were campaigning about, and that's what we must ensure, that new technology actually works in our favour. And there are plenty of other jobs that need to be done, and at the risk of repeating some of the comments I made this morning, in terms of public services, that is clearly labour intensive. We need to expand our public services in a decent society. So in terms of the new technology and the other things that we talked about this morning, now we can grow the economy, and the fruits of that we ought to be able to put into working a shorter working week and to employing more public servants, so that we can have good quality, decent public services. I think the point about a maximum wage is an interesting one. It may be a step too far, bearing in mind that politics is the art of the possible, if I can quote a Tory. But Butler did make that point. I do think there is a lot of truth in that. We can have all the best policies in the world, but if people don't vote for us, we're knackered. So we've got to find a way of bringing people on side. I think one of the best ways in which we can achieve that, however, is by strengthening the trade unions. Because the strong trade union movement did have a drag effect on the stratospheric salaries that we've seen, since Thatcher and Tony Blair and the rest of them. And back in 1979, when Margaret Thatcher walked through the door at number 10 Downing Street, the income multiple in the corporate sector was a fraction of what it is today. And just one example, the chief executive at Barclays Bank earned 20 times as much as a basic cashier in Barclays Bank. Well, today, by the time we got around to Bob Diamond, there was earning hundreds of times what a basic bank cashier was earning. So I think a stronger trade union movement can have that effect, but I think the point that Ozan was making about income multiples and bringing in policy was actually can force that, so that you can't get completely out of kilter, is something we do need to look at. As for this point about getting our MPs better clued up on, and I can say that is a good point. In terms of where money comes from, so as I understand, it's made up out of thin air, actually, and this is again a product of this this new great new world that came in, with the election of Thatcher and Reagan across the other side of the Atlantic, and the deregulation of financial services and this kind of great whiz bang thing that's going to generate all these tax revenues, and all really wonderful, wasn't it? No, it wasn't actually, but it did generate tax revenues. It was an engine for economic growth, that has to be said. But the fruits of that weren't equitably shared, as we know, and then when the crash came, we were overly exposed. So we do need to look at that. But look, if they can create money like that, to benefit the super rich, well, maybe we can create money like that. I can't click my fingers. There we go. For good purposes, for social purpose, to invest in infrastructure and all the things we talked about this morning. And then I think Caroline's made a very valid point about trade union fees and youth rates and all the rest of it. And I mean, I'm currently a member of United Community. I'm not working at the moment. So, I mean, there are different ways in which people can get involved. But if you think back to the emergence of the trade union movement, I mean, people had far less then So, oh, I've got to shut up again. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think more to what Caroline said. I think she's made a point on that one.
Right, thanks. Well, I think we've run out of time, and I think it's been a great session, and we've heard some really good contributions from Islam about public investment and the way to tackle inequality in our society. Caroline, I think it's a really important issue about the trade unions and youth, because I mean it is a real problem within our society, and it's about actually building trade union growth, because I think as Usman said and Chris said is about the collective bargaining is so important to actually protect wages and actually build wages. And from Chris, you know, an excellent contribution again. So I'd just like to remind people, carrying on in this room, we've next got the health and education, a right not a privilege. And in the room upstairs in 2C is the next session.